Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard the Wright Flyer. I'm Randy Wright, and I'll be your captain on this solo flight special edition of our state-of-the-art radio program. Folks, this will be the final boarding call, so if you please, claim your seats, fasten your seat belts, kick back, relax, and enjoy the show while I go ahead and delve into the pre-flight checklist, as there really is a lot of news and information to get to before I may fully indulge you with your in-flight entertainment. Well, folks, here we are. We are approaching the final run-up to the time that the American people head into the ballot box to cast their ultimate determination as to whom they believe is best qualified to be President of the United States of America. And one of the things that we've noticed all throughout this disastrous fiasco of a 2016 presidential election cycle is the fact that the media has not been entirely honest. There's been a lot of fast reporting, and not necessarily in a good way. In fact, I'd go so far as to say that the media has been more dishonest in this election cycle, at least in any other of living memory. It's something that has been building up for over a century and a half now. We've done a program in which we covered the bizarre ascension of William Randolph Hearst and his newspaper media conglomerate, and it shows no signs of improving at any time within the foreseeable future. We see that right now there is a report that the National Enquirer paid $150,000 for a Trump story of affair or having an affair with a Playboy bunny that they then spiked. And of course, the reason for this is probably the close relationship that Trump has with David Pecker, the owner of the National Enquirer. We know that Pecker had run the stories that were uncorroborated against Texas Senator Ted Cruz back during the time that he was still vying for the highest office in the land. And they did it to poison the voting pool. They did it to create a false narrative. And oft-times in politics, as we have mentioned on previous episodes of Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, a perception in the media or in the arena of American politics can oftentimes matter more than reality. That is what David Pecker and the National Enquirer were trying to do all those months ago, and it appears that that is what they are trying to do now. It's rather sad to see that that is the current course of events and the way that the media is going, but it is certainly not the first time that the media has come forth and done these deliberate, misleading, and, dare I say, intellectually disingenuous sorts of approaches to covering the big stories that matter to the American people. It's all to try and control the narrative, because they want to be able to be the peddlers of the story. That makes them think that they have encountered or engendered a significant amount of power, which I don't think they rightfully deserve to have done. That is the current state of affairs that we face in this once thriving and flourishing representative republic and vibrant community of popular sovereigns of ours. And it is something that I think should be sending off alarm bells and sending up red flags for decent, hard-working, red-blooded American citizens from coast to coast and border to border. Because when these media outlets go forth and attempt to control the narrative by peddling what can only be described as unadulterated propaganda, they are essentially trying to prevent you or prohibit you from gaining access to the truth. That is what they have been working towards. That is what their ultimate goals are, and I don't believe that that is something that has a place in an open, honest, but above all free society like that of these United States of America. So how do we combat this? We combat it by using the tools that are available for our disposal. The great thing about this internet revolution is that it gives each and every one of us the ability to sit there and vet what these candidates are saying and what they're doing. It allows us to realize when the media sources and outlets are not giving us the whole truth, when they are attempting to frame it, as was the case with the National Enquirer, in such a way as to limit the perspective of the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty in this once thriving and flourishing representative republic of ours, we the people. When we have that in mind, it makes it easier. to see who is attempting to bamboozle us, who is attempting to create a false narrative, and who is really looking to harm the true sovereigns, we the people. It was at one time that we could say that this was primarily just limited to the auspices of the left. For the longest amount of time, the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists have had a stranglehold on the rank and file of the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media. Unfortunately, what we see is that the so-called right-wing or conservative punditry and commensurate has engaged now in this intellectually disingenuous fluff as well. And none of that, in my opinion, comes out to shed any good light on our entire process. If anything, it should give everyone reason to pause and wonder why it is that the media, even on the right, wants to lie. Well, partly it comes down to what they're trying to do is create an avenue here for them to make money. That it's a money-making scheme that has nothing to do with movement conservatism. Yet they have couched their approach as though they are ideological movement conservatives, when in fact their actions and their words and their deeds show that nothing could be further from the truth. This is the sort of thing that we have to be exceedingly cautious with respect to, because it means that what they will do is say anything and everything just to gain ratings. They don't care what happens to you. They don't care about the things you care about, and ultimately I think that works to our great disadvantage in the arena of American politics. It shows that unlike the left, we do not have a source that we can rely upon to successfully or truthfully and honestly cover the news in a way that is appropriate to our point of view. In the years past, particularly towards the beginning of our nation, we know that the Founding Fathers had news pamphlets. That was part of the whole purpose of having a free press. But back then, they made sure that everything that they said exposed the bent and angle of which they were coming from. And I believe that that is a wholly more honest and forthright position to assume with respect to the dissemination of information. Instead of trying to claim one thing while embracing someone who espouses views and ideas that are diametrically opposed to the movement that you have proclaimed to be an adherent of for decade after successive decade, why don't you just put all of your cards on the table? Honesty, it appears now, folks, more than anything else, is an endangered species in the American system of polity, and I find that to be something that should be a point of contention and concern for American citizens all throughout this land. We can ill afford to allow our nation to be bamboozled like this. And again, I think it's important that we recall that with respect to the National Enquirer that had this piece, that spent that rather large sum of money to obtain that story with respect to Trump having a tryst with a Playboy bunny only to spike it or to hide it from public attention, that we go back and look at some of the things that Trump said with respect to the whole thing with Texas Senator Ted Cruz's father allegedly being involved with the JFK assassination plot. Is that a true position? No. Was it a corroborated story? Again, the answer is no. This is, once again, just the way that Trump and the dishonest media that he has used has gone forth to try and rewrite the narrative, to bamboozle the American people, to essentially attempt to make Trump something that he clearly is not. And again, I think in the end, that always comes back to bite us. That sort of disingenuousness always is harmful, and it doesn't serve movement conservatives. But then again, this entire thing has not been about serving movement conservatives. Rather, it has been about attempting to put forth a narrative to help a particular candidate come hell or high water, and that, my friends, is clearly intellectually disingenuous.
His father was with Lee Harvey Oswald prior to Oswald's being, shot. I mean, the whole thing.
You know, folks, right there, what you saw in that clip is an example of how Donald J. Trump has been intellectually disingenuous all throughout this presidential election cycle thus far. Dating back to the primary process, he's willing to say anything and everything in order to essentially bolster his position. If he thinks it will help him, if he thinks it will help him build a position of strength in which he comes across as looking stronger, or that it will tear apart his opponents, that's what he does. And folks, it's this type of character assassination that we have attacked the left for over and over again, saying that essentially when they do stuff like that, it is intellectually disingenuous drivel that has no place in an open, honest, but above all, free society and electoral process like what we have here in these United States of America. Unfortunately, this has become the established new norm in the American system of polity, particularly ever since Donald J. Trump officially threw his hat into the ring back in July of 2015. This is one of the reasons why my first officer, Jeremy Grapington, and I have oftentimes reiterated and warned on previous episodes of Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, that Donald Trump is simply not a good candidate. First and foremost, he does not espouse conservative views. For the vast majority of the 70 years that he has spent on God's green earth, Trump has been a progressive or a frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftist hell-bent on peddling the narrative of the left. And when you stop and think about it, that is the last thing that we should be attempting to do after we have suffered through the disastrous twin terms of the Barack Hussein Obama regime. We see that by going forth and engaging in character assassination, Trump is essentially using intellectually disingenuous methods of securing the reins of political power. He is a man who has no restraint. Otherwise, he wouldn't be peddling things from WikiLeaks. In fact, one of the rare times that we agreed with Florida Senator Narco Rube EIEIO is when he said that we should be cautious about turning to WikiLeaks information because the veracity of that information, as well as the source of that information, cannot be completely trusted. Yet some of the loudest cheerleaders and profiteers for the Trump candidacy, I'm talking his loudest surrogates like Sean Hannity, have done a complete 180 on the positions that they've held with respect to information that has been disseminated by WikiLeaks. Years ago, Hannity said that WikiLeaks was doing a great disservice in that they were placing American servicemen and women in direct jeopardy and in harm's way. But now he says that over 10 years that they have not, that they've never gotten anything wrong. It's this sort of just changing your narrative in order to fit a particular candidate or to fit your side that draws so many people away from the American system of polity. Is it any wonder that there are huge swaths of the American electorate who find themselves completely disenfranchised with the system when honesty seems to take a back seat for expediency? Expediency does not help the American people. Instead, it places us in a precarious and dangerous position, one that we can ill afford to find ourselves in now. However, that never mattered to Sean Hannity. Sean Hannity is a feckless cheerleader. He is someone that simply wishes to bite down on a narrative come hell or high water, and that is why we think that he is perhaps most assuredly an intellectual lightweight. I wish that weren't the case. I wish that he was someone we could trust. I wish that he was someone who actually espoused conservative views and values, but that simply is not the case, and this disastrous fiasco known as the 2016 presidential election cycle has exposed that for all of us to see without question. Now the question is, how do we begin to restore the process of honesty and integrity, as well as honor, to the American political system? I am not so naive as to say that politics is a fun or nice game. Yes, it can be intriguing, and parts of it can be fun, but it is not a nice system. Much like our legal system, it is adversarial. And the reason it's adversarial is because in a virtuous republic, in which the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty, in other words, we, the people of these United States of America, are fully aware and cognizant of what is going on in our electoral process, it gives us a chance to vet the candidates and to make an educated determination as to whom we believe is best suited and qualified to be the next commander-in-chief, or in other words, the next person to wield the reins of political power in this beloved, constitutionally endowed federalist representative republic of ours. Unfortunately, that is not what has happened in this electoral process. This election cycle has been about chicanery. It has been about bamboozling the American people. Radicalism and extremism have become the new established norms, and I'm not so certain that that is healthy for the American electoral cycle or process. But above all else, what it really proves is that we are continuing to go down the path of further distancing and divorcing ourselves from the only litmus test that matters. If you go back into our archives and the libraries of videos that we've done over the year that we have been taking you over the friendly airwaves, unlike any other radio venue or program out there, you will find that we have said that the most important and indeed the only litmus test that should really matter when making such ultimate determinations as to whom is best qualified to be the next president of the United States of America, it is none other than our shared United States Constitution. The reason for this is the Constitution defines who we are, both as a nation and as a people. It also expressly details and mandates what it takes to maintain a free, open, but above all honest society like that of the United States of America. You see, our founding fathers had infinite wisdom and foresight when they handed down this great representative republic to us. They understood that, yes, there would be times in which it might need to be changed. That is why they gave us the Article 5 amendment process. But far too many people don't want to go through that because there is an arduous process of securing that change. The reason that the process is so arduous is that we don't want people to be able to establish political fads and to just change the laws. You can see that in the constitutions of the several states. They have multiple times more amendments to the state constitutions than you will ever find in the federal constitution. There's a few reasons for that. First and foremost, it's because the state constitutions are not creating a government of full limited power like that of the federal government. According to the tenets of federalism, or in other words, the way in which the proper scope and application of government is to work, we provide a process in which the federal government must trace its authority back, any and all of its authority back, to a power that is specifically enumerated unto it by the clear and concise language contained within the four corners of our shared United States Constitution. On the other hand, when you are dealing with the state governments, they are said to possess near plenary power. In other words, they are considered to be much closer to the people, meaning that the people can exert much greater power and influence over them, and therefore they have more power. One of the greatest examples of this is what is known as the general police power. That is where the states are allowed to legislate in order to promote the health, safety, well-being, and yes, even morality of their people. That is something that the federal government cannot do. That, of course, is again by the design that our founding fathers had conjured up during the inception of this nation some 235 plus years ago. Again, these are things that you won't hear professed by the rank and file of the graduates of Pavlov School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media, nor will you hear it in the institutions of education in America from coast to coast and border to border, because again, it goes against the propagandistic narrative and agenda that has been foisted upon us by the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftist. Their entire modus operandi here, folks, is to bamboozle the American people, to make us bow down to their dark and twisted machinations come hell or high water. And it's because deep down what they ultimately are hoping to achieve here is to rewrite American history, to have it to where we bow down to their narrative of events, because they know that deep down they cannot compete freely or openly in a free marketplace of ideas. No one in their right mind would want to freely exchange in that sort of a system, because it was basically theft by any other name. And the reason that it's theft by any other name is because they must steal. It is what we can only refer to as a parasitic system. That is literally what it is. And that's unfortunate, because we can do so much better than that. We are a robust and free people. It is why our federal constitution is the longest contiguous or uninterrupted running constitution in all of human events. It shows that our founding fathers understood innately the inherent condition of humanity, this desire to be free, this desire to live our life unmolested by the tyrannical and heavy hand of government. Unfortunately, that is not what this current crop or slate of candidates believes in. They are going to continue to push for expanding the scope, bounds, and horizons of the federal government, because deep down in their heart of hearts they believe that is what's in the best interest for themselves. Again, it doesn't come to the interests of the American people. It's not to help us. It's to promote their own outlook, and to do that at the great expense of we the people. And again, this system cannot work. It does not work. It is a dangerous system that is dishonest. And is it any wonder then that the American people do not trust Donald Trump, and that they do not trust Hillary Clinton? And I believe that the answer to that should be both open and obvious as well. They don't trust them because they are not telling the truth. These are the two most dishonest candidates that have vied for the highest office in living memory. And what they want is power for themselves. I know that seems repetitive, but when you look at it, how can we come to any conclusion but what they are doing is trying to benefit themselves at the expense of we the people? We know that Hillary Clinton has these email scandals, and the fact that Huma Abedin-Wiener is in hiding, essentially, shows us that there really is some bad things there. We have these rules in place to keep the American people safe, but apparently that doesn't matter, at least not to those who are seeking the highest office in the land. And now we know that Paul Manafort is also under investigation by the FBI for engaging in his close ties with Russia, particularly with his dealings in the Ukraine. These things will have a disparate impact on our electoral process. They will have a disparate impact on our free system, and that is something that cannot be ignored. Yet, the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftist and these just so-called conservatives aren't going to play that. The detente wing of the gutless opposition party has already made its determination to support Donald Trump come hell or high water. That is why we find ourselves in this untenable situation as I sit here speaking into this microphone, conveying this message unto you. And as we approach, what is it? I'm guessing we are about 3 to 2 days away from the point where the American people head into the ballot box to make their determination as to whom they believe is the best qualified to be the next president of the United States. You have to ask yourself, do these people really represent you? Do they really have your best interest at heart? If you can, in a clear conscience, come to that conclusion, then all the more power to you. As for me, it's something I cannot, in good faith or in good conscience, do. I must be true to my values. And when we are in a time when we can no longer claim that we can be true to our values, that we can uphold those natural law tenets that have formed the bedrock foundation and principles of our nation for 235 plus years, then I think we truly are in dark and dangerous times in this once thriving and flourishing representative republic and vibrant community of popular sovereigns of ours. And to me, that really is something that's sad. It tells me that we are marching towards dark and uncertain times in our nation. But that does not mean that we cannot overcome these hurdles, obstacles, and adversities that have been placed in our path. If there is one people on the face of God's green earth that are truly capable of overcoming all of these hurdles, obstacles, and adversities that have been placed in our path, it is we the people. We are incredibly decent people. We are incredibly gifted when it comes to standing up for what we love and believe in this nation. And it's why our enemies, for time and memorial, have underestimated us each and every time. But the only way that that can continue to be the course of the United States is for we to come together standing shoulder to shoulder in solidarity and unity. We are the ones that control this nation. It's not the party bosses. It's not the special interest groups. It damn sure is not the politicians. It is we the people. But in order to do that, we have to realize just how significant and important our role is as the popular sovereigns of this once thriving and flourishing representative republic of ours. We have to be able to put aside a great plethora of these differences that we've allowed to divide us, and that's exactly why the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists have time and time again turned to divide and conquer, because what they want is for us to attack one another, to go after each other's jugulars, to try and bleed this nation dry so that we reach such a point of anemia that they can forcefully change us, and not for the better. When you stop and think about it, why change something that isn't broken? It's as that old adage goes, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Well, they are trying to say it's broken. They are the ones that go forth and create problems and pretend as though they have the solutions for them. That, folks, is a classic example of Cloward Piven. Cloward and Piven were those two egghead academicians from Columbia University who decided that back in the 1950s and early 1960s that what we needed to do was overwhelm the so-called safety net in America, the sort of socialist system that was originally established in FDR's New Deal during the Great Depression of the 1930s, so that the American people would essentially be knocked down onto their knees, so that they would come crawling to the government for the government to provide a solution for what indeed turned out to be a problem that government created in the first place. That is the sort of intellectually disingenuous drivel that we have had to fight for well over a half-century now, folks. And the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists have essentially made a science out of this. They will use anything and everything to push this narrative come hell or high water, irrespective of the fact that it is not in the best interest of the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty. When we keep this in mind, it gives us the power to parse through it, to see who it is that is actually out there working against the best interests of the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty, we the people. Again, it's why we here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, have said that our goal and our mission here is to empower you by giving you the tools to foster that fluent and working knowledge and understanding of not only our shared United States Constitution, but also your fundamental and inalienable rights, which happen to be endowed to you by your Creator, who happens to be none other than the God of nature himself. When you have that working knowledge, that fluent and working knowledge and understanding, you are able to put your foot down and reiterate the most powerful two monosyllabic word in the English language that is perhaps universally understood. No. No, you cannot abridge my rights. No, you cannot encroach upon my rights. And no, you cannot redefine my nation away from being a constitutionally endowed, federalist, representative Republican form of government. Only we can do that, folks, and that is why we are here to empower you.
All the time, but especially in the heated election, on a topic this explosive, every word matters, no matter how well sourced. Which brings me to this. I explained a couple of times yesterday the phrasing of one of my answers to Brit Hume on Wednesday night, saying it was inartful. The way I answered the last question about whether the investigations would continue after the election. And I answered that, yes, our sources said it would. They would continue to likely an indictment. Well, that just wasn't inartful. It was a mistake. And for that, I'm sorry. I should have said they will continue to build their case.
Well, inartful is certainly one way of putting that. You know, one of the things that we have oft-times reiterated on previous episodes of Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, is just how dangerous the game of semantics can be. First of all, it's dangerous in that it will bamboozle the people, make people feel as though what they're hearing is not the truth, or make them believe or buy into something that's not the truth, but it's also a sign of sort of just a laziness when it comes to reporting. And reporters oftentimes go forth and just compile things from the same sources, and they don't do any background checking on it. And that's not to say that the Fox News Channel was not doing their due diligence in having sources. I mean, earlier in what's not shown in that clip, Bret Baier was explaining to John Scott that they had at least 6 to 7 sources for this that were impeccable sources, but that his answer was inartful. First of all, I'm not entirely sure what he meant when he was trying to say that it was inartful, other than the more accurate term for that would be to claim that what he said was inaccurate. That's the thing. It's trying to use these words, these fluff words that try and take some of the sting out of it that can come across as wholly dishonest and intellectually disingenuous. And it's something that happens far too often with respect to the rank and file of the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media. The fact of the matter is that the American people deserve better than this. We deserve to have honest reporting. And I don't think necessarily, per se, that Bret Baier was attempting to go out there and bamboozle the American people. It's just that he was just a little loose with his lips. And, of course, what that brings up to my mind, is this old adage that came out of World War II. In fact, it was an old poster that was used in order to try and get people to be cognizant and aware of the sorts of information that they were disseminating on the home front throughout the conflict. And it was a famous poster. It showed a ship slipping beneath the waves, having been attacked by either a Japanese submarine or, more likely than not, a German U-boat, and it said that loose lips sink ships. Now, what did they really mean by that? Well, it was that when you went around not really fact-checking the things that you said and being unaware of whom you were saying things to, it placed our national security at jeopardy. That is the problem that the whole Hillary email server, keeping all of those top secret and highly classified documents on a private email server located in a Colorado loft apartment bathroom, did expose our servicemen and women to increased risk and exposed us to national security breaches that otherwise would not have occurred is so important. It literally does place the nation in a precarious position, one that is avoidable. Unfortunately, Hillary Clinton didn't care. It goes to show that these people truly do think that they are so far above the law that they can literally get away with anything. And that's the problem that my first officer, Jeremy Grapington, and I, as well as our first Air Marshal, Mr. Nelson Ward, have with respect to the slate of the two candidates for the mainstay political parties vying for the highest office in the land. They are not standing up for what matters to the true, decent, hard-working, red-blooded American citizens. Rather, they are engaging in this sort of tomfoolery that places us at exceeding risk. But the reason that I started this segment with that clip from Bret Baier of the Fox News Channel is to also demonstrate how the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media can have a disparate impact upon how information is disseminated and whether what they are reporting can be taken for the truth. Now, in years past, when it was just a couple of networks, mainstream terrestrial networks such as ABC, CBS, and NBC, they could more easily get away with that. They could more easily get away with it in the earliest days of cable news as well, because we didn't have the information revolution that was this internet. The internet and social media and all of those things that have empowered us. Anyone with a, smartphone that has a camera can go out and become instant reporters. They can put the footage on social media websites such as Facebook and Twitter, as well as an amalgamation of others that allows that information to just be out there real time. And of course, that has revolutionized the way that news is disseminated. But it also means that we have to become more diligent in our fact-checking. For instance, we here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, have no problem conveying this news to you, but one of the messages that we've always conveyed to you, our cherished listening passengers and audience members, is never to take the things that we say at face value. We want you to look into the things that we say. We want you to see if it corroborates with the other sources that you're hearing, and to whether it fits your own research and analysis of the issues that are pressing to us both as a nation and as a people. And with the internet and social media, that has become far easier than ever before. But at the same time, it means that there are sources out there that are intellectually disingenuous, that are not about conveying the truth, that have their own narrative and agenda that they wish to push forward, and that oftentimes can make this all the more difficult to get down to what is true, what is important, and what actually matters to you, the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty in this once thriving and flourishing representative republic of ours, we the people. So how do we go about finding the truth? How do we go about fact-checking these things to ensure that we are disseminating the truth? Well, we have to go and check all sources, read between the lines, and keep the Constitution as the measuring stick by which we compare each and all of this to. By having that wide plethora of information and fact-based checking available to us and at our disposal, we are better able to keep things in line, to, in a sense, keep things in order. Now, I know that that is far easier said than done, particularly when we live in a fast-paced modern society as we do today. Nevertheless, it is our duty, obligation, and above all, responsibility to do so. Recall that one of the things that Sam Adams had said is that in order for our republic to be a robust and truly effective republic, that we must be a virtuous republic. In other words, the American people, who are the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty, must be kept abreast of what is happening both in current events and with the current state of affairs with our system of polity. It means that they must be informed, but above all, it means that we must also select candidates who are virtuous. Now, what we see with respect to this disastrous fiasco of a 2016 presidential election cycle is that neither one of the two candidates for the two mainstay political parties are what I would go out and say are people of good moral standing. In fact, nothing could be further from the truth. We have a liar and a crook versus, well, for all intents and purposes, a liar and a crook. I showed you in the last segment how Donald Trump, the current gutless opposition party or GOP nominee for the highest office in the land, went around basically pushing and peddling baseless, uncorroborated stories against Texas Senator Ted Cruz and his father, as well as his wife, and that is not reflective of what I would consider a decent or moral, upstanding candidate. We see that Hillary Clinton has gone forth and lied to the American public on more than one occasion, and that too truly has no place in an open, honest, but above all free society like the United States of America. These are the problems that we're encountering, and they are problems that show no signs of improving at any point in the foreseeable future unless and until we, in our capacity as the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty, begin to hold these people accountable for their words, deeds, and actions. You see, part of being in a truly robust, free, representative, and virtuous republic is that our duties and obligations are always there. You cannot be one that exercises or freely enjoys a right and a freedom or liberty without there being a duty and obligation as well as responsibility couched with it that carries equal weight and importance. Ultimately, what that means for our fundamental and inalienable rights, which were endowed to us by our Creator, the God of nature himself, is that we must be proactive in the maintenance and safeguarding of those rights to ensure that they are handed down to posterity. When you look back at the beautiful and poetic language of the preamble to our shared United States Constitution, you see that it is we the people that came together to create this government. And not just to create the government, but to hand down the ability to enjoy and freely exercise our fundamental and inalienable God-given rights without the fear of governmental repercussions and encroachment, not just for ourselves, but to hand it down to posterity. That means that we'd hand it down to the up-and-coming generations, and indeed those generations which have yet to be born. That is a duty, obligation, and responsibility that Americans have shouldered in their capacity as the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty since the inception of this nation some 235 plus years ago. That is something that cannot change. That is something that we cannot turn our backs on, nor is it something we can ignore. Yet, the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists, and I would dare to go out on a limb here and say that the so-called alternative right or alt-right do not want us to think that. You see, the danger of the 2016 presidential election cycle is that we're allowing certain nefarious forces to come into the limelight and to essentially become a new established norm in our system of polity. These forces are not the traditional voices of reason. And you see, when you have a system that's based off of philosophy, because if you recall from the immortal words of the late, great Maggie Thatcher, that Prime Minister of the United Kingdom during the 1980s, that the United States, unlike Europe, which was formed on history, is formed on a philosophy. You have to be able to know what the philosophy of the United States of America is. And the philosophy of the United States, without question, is that we are based on those immutable natural law tenets. In other words, those foundational roots that you can find in the poetic language that Thomas Jefferson person penned in the Declaration of Independence, that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and that they are endowed by their Creator with certain fundamental and unalienable, which simply means inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, you begin to realize that the entire bedrock purpose of our government is to ensure that the people are free. It's not about government power. That is what it has become perverted to be. That is what people who are currently vying for the highest office in the land would erroneously have us believe that the system is all about, but nothing could be further from the truth. It is about allowing the people to exercise their rights. The government is there to ensure that neither external nor internal influences can come and impede that ability of the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty of exercising and truly enjoying their rights and handing that down to the up-and-coming generations, and indeed those generations which have yet to be born. That is the significant beauty about what the United States stands for and represents. It speaks volumes about the infinite wisdom and foresight that our founding fathers had with respect to what a proper system of government and polity would be all about. So, what does that mean? Ultimately and truly, what that means is that we, as a nation and as a people, are the beneficiaries of the greatest birthright of any people on God's green earth. That birthright of which I speak is the greatest social compact or contract ever devised by the hands of men, yet divinely inspired by providence above. It is our United States Constitution. But why is it that in this disastrous fiasco of an election cycle we have seen very little discussed with respect to our fundamental and inalienable rights, as well as the Constitution? It's because you have these disparate and competing factions, such as the so-called alternative right, that are attempting to rewrite the history of the United States. They want us to believe that tribalism, in the case of the alternative right, is the way that nationalism is defined. But truth be told, the nationalism of the United States, in which nationalism per se is not necessarily a bad thing, is defined and mandated by the clear and concise language contained within the four corners of our shared United States Constitution. There is no way of getting around that. There is no way of attempting to rewrite that. That is a pivotal point of who we are as a nation and as a people. But the alternative right has come forth and said that they don't believe that. They believe that that is quaint, or that it's antiquated and has no place in a fast-paced modern society like that of the United States. In other words, what they truly believe and what they are inherently preaching is that the United States of America is a nation that has been led astray by the Enlightenment era thinking that really was the foundational and philosophical basis of the establishment of the United States as a nation and as a people. They think that that has made us inherently and intrinsically weak, when in fact nothing could be further from the truth. Of course, the great danger that comes about with respect to that is that they are falling into the same intellectually disingenuous narrative and trap that has been put forward by the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists. Deep down, what they are all pushing for is to fundamentally, drastically, irreparably, and permanently transforming the United States of America away from being a constitutionally endowed, representative Republican form of government into some twisted dystopia, whether it be a truly alt-right dystopia, or whether it be a frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftist dystopia. But either one is one in which they go against the bedrock pillars and the foundational purpose and narrative of our nation, and allow us to be led astray from that which matters, from that which is truly important, that which is the bedrock foundation of our culture, our society, our nation, and our system of polity. I wish that weren't the case, but that is the case of what we're facing right now. And what we see is Hillary Rotten Clinton is not going to improve the current status quo that is ailing and afflicting us, both as a nation and as a people, and Donald J. Trump is not going to either. But if your fear of Hillary Clinton is to such a degree that you feel that it is necessary that your conscience drives you to vote for Donald Trump, then all the more power to you. You see, that's what it means to vote your conscience. And that is why I found it so shocking and surprising that on that convention floor back in Cleveland, Ohio, in the month of July, when Ted Cruz gave his speech, that he was booed for saying that you should go and vote your conscience. Ultimately, his conscience, I'm assuming it was his conscience at least, I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt with the statement that he said that after praying and thinking about it for a long time, he came to the ultimate inevitable conclusion that he had to vote for Trump is true. I know that he was threatened by RNC chairman Rinse and Repeatus with being cut off from any kind of funding. That's not necessarily a bad thing to worry about when you are not someone who is just fully possessive of wide, expansive amounts of wealth, but it does show that the political powers that be, those elitists, those who currently wield the reins of political power, are attempting to control the narrative, and they are attempting to do so in an intellectually disingenuous fashion. They are standing in a way that is staunchly and diametrically opposed to the hopes, dreams, and future aspirations and goals of the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty, we the people, and that in and of itself makes me come to the inevitable conclusion that they loathe and despise the ability of the American people to think and to act for themselves. Unfortunately, the alt-right and the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists are of the same mindset. So essentially, what it comes down to show us is that what we're facing right now is a system in which there really is not much in which you can distinguish or differentiate the two mainstay political parties from one another. They are both coming from this and operating in such a way as to make me believe that what they're doing is working against the best interests of the American people. There is nothing in their words, deeds, and actions that could convince me otherwise. But when you tie this into the fact that the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media are continuing to operate in such a fashion as to leave the American people without an honest source of media other than to have to dig through it for themselves, which is not in and of itself a bad thing, but the fact that they are being intellectually disingenuous, that is a bad thing. It should cause us to pause and wonder exactly what it is that they are attempting to foist down our throats. Because when you stop and think about it, when you play fast and loose with the stories, when you are going forth and not necessarily conveying the objective facts without a little bit of a spin, which being human nature, we know that that is sometimes impossible to be fully objective. I think that it does create this instance in which the American people feel as though the political powers that be and the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media have been rigging this system all along. That would be the one area where if Trump had said that this thing is rigged, that it was rigged to help him get in, that it was rigged so that he would get the nomination for the gutless opposition party to then go forth and lose in the general election cycle or to perform as poorly as he has, I would agree. But then we see that the timing with the FBI thing, after back in July he said there really wasn't enough evidence to move forward, now just days before the election, a little less than a week away at the time that it was announced, it comes to the surface again. Why? Why is it that that suddenly comes up? What was there to convince him Because one of the things that James Comey had said was that his wife told him to do this. Then there was talk about pressure coming from agents within the FBI saying that they would have moved forward. It's baffling. And above that, it tells us that there are nefarious forces in the woodworks here, that they are pushing a narrative that's not necessarily an honest narrative, and it's one in which we should be fully aware of what's going on. Because if they are doing it in that fashion, or if they are going forth to try and preach a certain narrative, come hell or high water, irrespective of what that will do to us, both as a nation and as a people, I think we should approach it with caution. I think that we should ask ourselves what exactly is going on, because if there is one thing that we have learned from this disastrous fiasco of a 2016 presidential election cycle, oftentimes, in fact, more often than not, what is being preached as the true narrative or message is not as it seems. That there is always some sort of a ulterior motive going on in the background, allowing the nefarious forces that are trying to get a leg up on the entire American system of polity to essentially bamboozle the American people. And I, for one, am sick and tired of seeing this become the new norm in the United States. I think it is intellectually disingenuous. I think it is doing a grave disservice to the American electorate. And again, it draws me back to how do we be a virtuous republic when those forces that are in charge of the dissemination of information have been going forth and just recklessly spinning a narrative that is not based in fact, but is rather based in idle speculation. You see, folks, I don't think that serves us well. I think that does put us in a precarious position, one that could literally leave us exposed to a sort of danger that we can ill afford to go through right now. Particularly when you consider just how important the things that are facing us right here, right now, as I sit here and speak into this microphone are. Because, stop and think about it. Without our rights, we're left with nothing. And when there are those who are willing to say anything to essentially peddle a narrative that is not true, it means that they can mislead us. And that can only lead to more people feeling disenfranchised with the system, more people drawing the conclusion that their vote doesn't matter when, again, it's one of your rights. And it's as my first officer, Jeremy Grapenton, and our first Air Marshal, Mr. Nelson Ward, and indeed yours truly, has so oft times repeated on previous episodes of Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, that without our rights we're left with nothing. And I'm reminded again of the words of the great visionary Zygmunt Dobbs, who wrote in his magnus opus of Keynes at Harvard back in the 1950s and early 1960s, that these nefarious forces that want to completely, radically, drastically, and permanently transform the United States are banking on the fact that the American people are going to be so caught up in the deluge of the facets of their daily lives that they're not going to have time to pay attention and to keep abreast of all of the political occurrences and the current events that are coming forth in the nation, that it is too difficult for them, and therefore the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists will use a type of fluffery or fluffy language in which the true meaning of what they're saying is hard to figure out. That's, again, part of this game of semantics, and I point back to that clip with Britt Baer there, saying that it was inartful. Well, it's more than inartful. It is a type of control. It is a type of spinning the narrative to fit a particular agenda that will just drive the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty in this once thriving and flourishing representative republic of ours nuts. Because, again, we don't have the political capital or the political wherewithal to necessarily try and parse through all of these things each and every time. It does place us in a dangerous position. It does make us less able or less capable of going forth and really figuring out what the narrative is about. There can be no question that what Hillary Clinton was doing was wrong. But is there an indictment that's necessarily headed down the pike? I'm not so certain. If we were to go by what was said in July, the answer would be no. But what is it now? What does it mean that we're this close to an election? Can it be said that this isn't having a disparate impact on the election? Does this not give the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftist all the opportunity that they need to try and claim that indeed the election is rigged? All of a sudden, the ball has been removed from the court of Trump onto the side of the court of the frothing at the mouth Democrats to try and say, of course the system's rigged. Donnie has been throwing his money around to influence the election in ways that are wrong. We have the Russians who have been proclaiming that they'll go forth and try and disparately impact public opinion in the United States, and of course that's nothing new. When you go back to the way that yellow journalism under William Randolph Hearst and his newspaper conglomeration back in the late 1890s and early 1900s was able to shape American public opinion with respect to the Spanish-American War, that speaks volumes with just the amount of power that can be exerted by these external and nefarious forces that want to have a disparate impact and influence over our body politique. And it reminds me of something that George Washington said in his farewell address. He said that we, as a nation and as a people, should go out of our way to avoid breaking up into disparate competing factions, because when we do that, we lose sight of the overarching picture. And that overarching picture is, of course, none other than our shared United States Constitution. When we lose sight of that, it allows us to be forced into competing camps where we forget that we are all American citizens and that we are all governed by the supreme law of the land, which, pursuant to Article 6, Clause 2, which is 6-2 or fight, the supremacy clause means that the Constitution itself is the supreme law of the land. That is what we have lost sight of, unfortunately. Well, folks, with all of that said, it is time for us to begin our descent. I'm going to go ahead and send the flight attendant back for one last round of alcohol. As always, folks, she's not there to bamboozle you or to sell you a false narrative. She's just there to pour you some alcohol. As always, folks, I'm your captain, Randy Wright, and I want to thank you for choosing to fly the Wright Flyer. Should you have any questions, comments, or concerns, I invite you to leave them either here on our YouTube page or our Google Plus page, and on top of that, I invite you to leave them on our Facebook page. Please also follow us at Twitter with the Twitter handle @RadioAviationEX. One more time, folks, that's @RadioAviationEX, and there you will find the departure board that lists my personal Twitter account as well as the personal Twitter account of my first officer, Jeremy Grapendon, and there's also the Blogspot account in which we put up both links to our most recent episodes and the audio-only versions of our state-of-the-art radio program so that you can choose to listen to this show however you wish at your own leisure. And then it also lists the Cafe Press account, which I'm also including in the description of today's video. Folks, there's all sorts of trinkets and goodies there: hats, clocks, watches, neckties, shirts, apparel, drinking glasses, shot glasses, you name it, we've got it there at reasonable prices, either with our original Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer logo, or our First Class Passenger logo. Folks, with such a wide array of goodies at reasonable prices, surely you can find something that matches your needs. Go ahead and give us a bit of support so that we can continue to fly you over the friendly airwaves in comfort and style while leaving you with an indelible yet pure sense of enlightenment unlike any other radio program or venue out there. Thank you again for flying the Wright Flyer, folks. We'll see you again next time. Please do take care.